I never thought my marriage would come to this, but looking back, maybe it was always going to. My husband never liked my sister, and to be fair, I couldn't blame him. She was wild, impulsive, and lived in a world so far removed from the one he understood. But she was my sister, and despite her chaos, I loved her fiercely. He said she was a bad influence, especially when she dragged me along to one of her wild nights out or suggested we try an open marriage like she had with her husband. He didn't take her seriously, neither did I, at first. We both laughed it off, knowing our boundaries. At least, I thought I knew mine. Our life, on the surface, was stable. We had decent jobs, a house that we were slowly making our own, and 2 kids who were growing faster than I could keep up with. Our routine felt predictable, and though it wasn't exciting, it was steady. He liked that. I did, too, most of the time. But in the quiet moments, when the kids were asleep and the house was too still, I sometimes felt the weight of everything I had chosen, the life I had built. I never said it out loud, I didn't even let myself think it fully, but part of me wondered if this was all there was. Then my sister had her baby, and everything seemed to shift. She didn't even know who the father was, not for certain. It wasn't her husband's, that much we knew after the DNA test. But he didn't seem to care. He stayed with her, standing by her in this mess like it was just another chapter in their strange, reckless love story. My husband hated that. He hated how she lived, hated the drama, the irresponsibility. But I couldn't walk away from her. She was my sister. And despite everything, I admired how free she seemed, how little she cared about the rules the rest of us had to follow. So, I started spending more time with her. My kids adored their new cousin, and I told myself it was good for them to play together, to bond as a family. My husband grumbled about it sometimes, but he didn't stop me. He was busy with work, caught up in the day-to-day grind that had come to define our life. Besides, I knew my limits. I wasn't like my sister. I knew where to draw the line. At least, I thought I did. One weekend, I told him I was heading to my sister's for the day. He didn't seem surprised, barely looked up from his computer when I mentioned it. It had become routine, me taking the kids over there, spending the day while he stayed home, catching up on work or watching TV. Sometimes I wondered if he even noticed when I was gone. But I brushed the thought away and packed up the car, the kids already chattering in the back seat about their cousin and the games they were going to play. The day went by in a blur of noise and laughter. The kids ran wild around the yard, my sister and I sitting on her porch, watching them with half an eye while we caught up over a bottle of wine. She always had stories, about the bikers who hung out at the bar down the road, about her latest adventure with her friends, about the open marriage she had somehow managed to make work. I laughed at her stories, shaking my head, telling her she was crazy. But there was something in the way she talked about her life, the way her eyes lit up when she mentioned the freedom she felt, that made me feel something I hadn't in a long time. That evening, after the kids were settled and dinner was done, my sister suggested we go out for a drink. Just one, she said, to unwind. I hesitated. It wasn't like me to go out like that, especially not without telling my husband first. But he was home, probably already halfway through a movie, and I knew he wouldn't mind. Besides, it had been ages since I'd done something just for me. One drink couldn't hurt. We ended up at a small bar not far from her place. It wasn't the kind of place I'd usually go to, a biker bar with loud music, worn-down stools, and a crowd that looked like they'd seen more than their share of trouble. My sister fit right in, waving to a few people she knew as we made our way to the bar. I felt out of place at first, awkward and out of step with the energy around me. But after a drink or two, I started to loosen up. The music, the noise, the sheer freedom of being away from the daily routine started to seep into me. And then I saw him. He was leaning against the bar, talking to a few other guys in leather jackets. He looked like someone out of a movie, rough around the edges, with a confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was. I didn't know why I kept glancing in his direction, but there was something about him that made it hard not to look. It wasn't attraction, not at first. It was more like curiosity, like seeing a life so different from mine that I couldn't help but wonder what it was like to live in his world, even for a moment. My sister noticed. She always noticed. You should talk to him, she said, nudging me with a grin. I laughed, shaking my head. Absolutely not. But she was persistent, teasing me, telling me I'd never know if I didn't try. And maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the feeling that I had nothing to lose, but I found myself walking over to the bar, ordering another drink, and exchanging a few words with him. It was harmless. He was charming, in that easy, unpolished way that guys like him often were. We talked about nothing, about the music, about the bar, about where I was from. He didn't know I was married, and I didn't offer the information. I wasn't hiding it exactly, but I wasn't advertising it either. It felt nice to talk to someone who didn't see me as a wife, or a mother, or anything other than the woman standing in front of him. As the night wore on, the conversation flowed easily. I laughed more than I had in a long time, and for a few hours, I felt like a different version of myself, someone lighter, freer, unburdened by the responsibilities waiting for me back home. But when the night ended, and I returned to my sister's house, the reality of my life settled back over me like a heavy blanket. I wasn't the woman from the bar. I was a wife, a mother, with a life that was real and full of commitments. And that life, for all its stability, was the one I had chosen. The morning after that night out with my sister, I woke up to the usual noise, my kids playing in the living room, their laughter and footsteps echoing through the house. Everything seemed normal, like it always did after a visit to my sister's. But inside, I didn't feel normal at all. As I lay there in bed, staring at the soft light filtering through the curtains, I thought about the bar. I thought about the rough voices, the loud music, the strangers who had been nothing more than passing faces, and then him. The man I'd spoken to at the bar. I tried to shake the memory off, but it stuck with me, like a subtle undercurrent I couldn't fully ignore. He wasn't the reason I went to the bar. He wasn't the reason I had gone out that night. But he had become the reason I kept thinking about it. I hadn't done anything wrong, not really. We'd only talked. A few words, a little laughter, it didn't mean anything. But it had felt different, and that difference gnawed at me. I got up, pushing the thoughts aside, and went to check on the kids. My sister was still asleep, sprawled out on the couch, half covered by a blanket she must have grabbed in the middle of the night. The kids were playing quietly, and the house smelled like the faint remnants of the late-night pizza we'd ordered. It was all so ordinary, yet I couldn't help but feel like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't name. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was my husband, asking what time we'd be home. He didn't say much else, didn't ask how the night went, didn't mention missing me or the kids. Just logistics. I texted him back quickly, telling him we'd be home by mid-afternoon. No warmth, no lingering conversation. Just facts. That's what our marriage had become, in a way, a series of facts, a checklist of tasks to get through the day. It wasn't bad. I wouldn't even call it unhappy. It was just stagnant. Predictable. And as much as I loved the security of it, part of me had started to wonder if that security was smothering me. The drive back home was quiet. The kids fell asleep in the back seat, and I spent the 2 hours on the highway lost in thought. My sister's life, chaotic as it was, started to seem more appealing in that moment than I'd ever let myself admit. She didn't have the kind of stability I did, didn't have the routine, the responsibilities, the weight of a life built around someone else's needs. But she had freedom. She moved through her life without the same walls I had built for myself. When I pulled into the driveway, my husband was already there, standing on the porch, waiting to help with the bags. He looked the same as always, casual, comfortable, in the middle of one of his long weekends off. He smiled when he saw the kids, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and we settled back into our usual rhythm, like nothing had changed. But something had. That night, as I lay in bed next to him, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to the bar, to the conversation, to the laughter that had come so easily. The way that man had looked at me, not as a wife or a mother, but just as a woman standing in front of him. It had been a long time since I felt like that. The next few weeks passed in a blur of routine. Work, school runs, dinners, and weekends spent with the kids. My husband and I barely spoke beyond the necessary. We weren't fighting, there was no tension, no real issue. But there was a distance growing between us, a space that seemed to widen every time we sat down for dinner or went to bed without a real conversation. We were drifting. I found myself thinking about that night more than I wanted to admit. Not obsessively, not every minute of every day. But enough. Enough to make me wonder if something inside me had changed. Enough to make me question if the life I had built was really the one I wanted. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some laundry, my sister called. Her voice, loud and full of energy as always, filled the quiet space of my kitchen. "So, when are you coming back?" she asked, without preamble. "Back where?" I replied, confused. "To the bar," she said, laughing. "You didn't think I'd let you get away with only one night of fun, did you? You were a hit." I rolled my eyes, half smiling, but something in her words tugged at me. The idea of going back, of stepping into that world again, lingered. "I don't think so," I said, trying to sound firm. "I've got too much going on here." "You always say that," she teased. "That's your problem, you're always too busy for fun. Just come out one more time. You need a break." I was about to refuse again, to tell her I couldn't, that I had responsibilities, that it wasn't who I was. But the words didn't come. Instead, I found myself hesitating, considering it. "What's the harm in one more night?" she pressed. "You deserve it." And maybe I did. Maybe I deserved a break from the monotony, from the constant pull of being everything for everyone. Maybe one night out, just to breathe, wouldn't change anything. I could go, have a drink, and come home, no harm done. "I'll think about it," I said finally, trying to sound non-committal. But even as I said the words, I knew what I was really thinking. I wanted to go back. I wanted to feel that spark again, even if it was just for a moment. The week dragged on, and every day, the idea of going back to the bar loomed larger in my mind. I told myself it was harmless, that it wasn't about anyone else, it was about me, about giving myself a break from the endless cycle of routine. My husband didn't notice anything different, didn't ask where my head was at, didn't even seem to care when I mentioned I might go see my sister again that weekend. It was Friday night when I finally made the decision. My sister called, and this time, I didn't hesitate. "I'll come," I said, my heart racing a little as I spoke the words. "Good," she replied, her voice full of triumph. "You won't regret it." I hung up, already feeling a strange mix of excitement and guilt. I wasn't doing anything wrong, I reminded myself. I was just going out with my sister. But there was a part of me that knew it was more than that. It wasn't just about the night out, it was about the escape, about slipping away from the life I had built, even if just for a few hours. And so, I went. That second night at the bar was different. I felt less out of place this time, more comfortable. My sister was in her element, laughing and joking with the regulars, and I found myself relaxing into the atmosphere. The drinks flowed more easily, the music seemed less abrasive, and the faces around me began to blur into a comforting haze of noise and motion. And then, just like before, I saw him. The biker from that first night. He was there again, leaning against the same spot at the bar, talking to the same group of guys. And just like before, my eyes found him in the crowd without even meaning to. I wasn't looking for trouble. But trouble, it seemed, had found me. This time, when our eyes met, I didn't look away. That night, as soon as I stepped into the bar with my sister, I could feel something different in the air. It wasn't just the smell of beer or the hum of the bikes parked outside. It was something inside me. I told myself it was harmless, that I was just here to unwind, to take a break from the grind of my everyday life. But deep down, I knew I was looking for something I hadn't felt in a long time. The bar was just as loud, just as crowded as the last time. My sister slipped into the crowd with her usual ease, waving at familiar faces, shouting jokes across the room. I followed, more comfortably this time. The nerves I'd felt the first time had faded, replaced by a strange excitement. The same bartender was working, and he greeted my sister with a wink. She ordered us drinks, 2 whiskeys on the rocks, and nudged me with her elbow. "You're getting better at this," she said with a grin. "Loosening up a little." I laughed, shaking my head. "Don't get used to it." But we both knew that wasn't true. As much as I wanted to tell myself I didn't belong here, there was a part of me that did. Or at least, a part of me that wanted to. The part of me that had grown tired of the same routines, the same faces, the same predictable rhythm of my life. I sipped my drink slowly, letting the warmth of the whiskey spread through me. The crowd was thicker tonight, a blur of leather jackets, worn jeans, and laughter. Somewhere in the back, a pool game was going on, and the sound of the balls cracking against each other echoed through the bar. I leaned against the bar, watching, feeling the energy around me start to seep in. And then I saw him. He was in the same spot as before, leaning casually against the bar, his back to the room, talking to a couple of guys who looked like they'd been on the road for days. His leather jacket was worn, the creases and scuffs telling stories of countless miles. His dark hair was unruly, his face just as rough and unshaven as I remembered. There was something about him that was magnetic, something that pulled at me even though I knew better. I caught his eye, and for a moment, everything else faded into the background. It was just a glance, but it felt like something more. My heart picked up its pace, and I quickly looked away, suddenly aware of my sister beside me, oblivious to the shift in my mood. I tried to focus on the conversation she was having with a group of regulars, some rough-looking guys she knew from the neighborhood, but my mind kept drifting back to him. I could feel his presence at the other end of the bar, like a steady hum just out of reach. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that I was just imagining it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, just like I had been watching him. Eventually, my sister dragged me into a conversation with the bartender and a few of her friends, but even then, I couldn't keep my focus. I laughed in the right places, nodded along with the stories, but part of me was elsewhere. Part of me was waiting for something to happen, even though I didn't know what. When my sister wandered off to play pool, I stayed behind at the bar, alone for the first time that night. I should have followed her, should have kept moving, but instead, I found myself lingering, nursing my drink, pretending to watch the game on the TV above the bar. And then he was there. He didn't say anything at first, just slid into the empty space beside me like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt the air shift around us, a subtle tension that made my pulse quicken. I didn't look at him right away, but I knew he was looking at me. I could feel his eyes on me, studying me, trying to figure out what I was doing in a place like this. "You're back," he said, his voice low, almost amused. I turned to face him, trying to play it cool, but I could feel the heat creeping up my neck. "Looks that way," I replied, taking a sip of my drink to steady myself. He smiled, just a little, and nodded toward the crowd. "Not really your scene, though, is it?" I shrugged, not wanting to admit that he was right. "I guess I'm still figuring that out." His eyes lingered on mine for a moment longer, like he was trying to read something in them, something I wasn't ready to give. Then he leaned back against the bar, relaxed, like we'd known each other for years. "So, what brings you back? Couldn't stay away?" I laughed, but it sounded nervous, even to me. "I'm here with my sister. She's the regular." He nodded slowly, taking that in. "The wild one." I smiled, shaking my head. "Yeah, that's her." There was a pause, the noise of the bar filling the space between us. I should have left it there, should have walked away and rejoined my sister. But instead, I stayed. Something about the way he looked at me, like I wasn't just another face in the crowd, like he saw something more, made it hard to pull away. We talked. It wasn't anything deep, small talk, mostly. He asked about my life, where I was from, what I did for work. I kept my answers vague, careful not to reveal too much. I didn't mention my husband, didn't mention the life waiting for me outside these walls. I told myself it didn't matter, that this was just a conversation, nothing more. But there was a tension beneath the surface, a quiet understanding between us that this wasn't just small talk. I learned his name, Luke. He was local, had grown up not far from where we were. He spent his days working on bikes, and his nights, well, he didn't say much about those. He didn't have to. He was easy to talk to, surprisingly so. And the more we talked, the more I felt myself relaxing, leaning into the conversation, into the moment. It was easy, too easy. And before I knew it, we were laughing, like this was the most natural thing in the world. Like we weren't strangers at all. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, reality came crashing back. I should go, I said, glancing toward where my sister was still deep in her pool game. Luke nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. You should. But I didn't move. Neither did he. For a long moment, we just stood there, the noise of the bar swirling around us, our conversation hanging in the air between us like something unfinished. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at something I wasn't sure I wanted to see. Then, finally, I pulled away. I'll see you around, I said, turning to leave, trying to sound casual, like this hadn't meant anything. Yeah, he replied, his voice low, steady. I'll be around. I walked away, my heart pounding, my hands trembling just a little. As I rejoined my sister, who was laughing with her friends, I tried to shake off the feeling that something had shifted. I hadn't done anything wrong, not really. But the way I felt, the way my pulse raced when Luke looked at me, told me that maybe, just maybe, I was closer to crossing a line than I wanted to admit. And once you get that close, it's only a matter of time before you do. The next time I saw him, everything changed. It was 2 weeks after that second night at the bar, and I had managed to put the whole thing out of my mind, or at least, that's what I told myself. Life had returned to normal. Work, kids, husband, everything in its place. The conversations with Luke felt like some strange dream, something that hadn't quite happened but lingered in my memory like a shadow. I had no intention of seeing him again, no intention of going back to that bar. It was just a momentary escape, something I needed at the time to remind myself that I was more than a wife and mother. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But that fragile sense of control crumbled when I got a message from my sister. She was hosting a small get-together at her place, nothing big, just a few friends, some drinks, a chance to unwind. She didn't pressure me to come, but the offer was there, sitting on my phone screen, tempting me in a way I couldn't explain. I should have said no. I knew I should. But instead, I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. My mind flashed back to that night at the bar, to the way Luke had looked at me, the easy flow of our conversation, the way I felt seen in a way I hadn't been in a long time. The excitement of it all had been intoxicating, and despite every logical part of my brain screaming at me to stay away, I found myself typing, "Sure, I'll be there." My husband barely looked up when I told him I was going to my sister's for the night. He muttered something about staying home with the kids, the same detached tone that had become our standard form of communication. He trusted me, had no reason not to. I'd never given him a reason to doubt me, and I wasn't planning to start now. But as I drove to my sister's, I could feel the anxiety creeping up my spine. The guilt, the thrill, it all swirled together in a chaotic mix I didn't know how to handle. I wasn't doing anything wrong, not yet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into dangerous territory. When I arrived, my sister greeted me with her usual energy, pulling me into the house and introducing me to the few friends she had over. It was a small group, mostly people I recognized from her usual crowd. I forced myself to relax, sinking into the couch with a drink in hand, trying to shake off the nerves. This was normal. This was just a casual night with friends. Then, I saw him. Luke was there, sitting casually at the kitchen table, a beer in his hand, talking to one of the guys I didn't recognize. The moment our eyes met, my stomach dropped. He didn't smile, didn't react at first, but his gaze lingered just long enough to send a shockwave through me. I hadn't expected to see him. I wasn't prepared for it. And in that moment, I knew I was in trouble. I tried to play it cool, focusing on my sister, on the conversation around me, but my mind kept drifting back to him. Every time I glanced in his direction, he was already looking at me, his expression unreadable, his presence impossible to ignore. It wasn't long before my sister disappeared with her friends into the backyard, leaving the two of us alone in the house. I could hear the laughter and chatter drifting in through the open window, but inside, it was just me and Luke. I should have left right then and there. I should have grabbed my keys, made some excuse about needing to get home, and walked out before anything happened. But instead, I stayed. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty as I stood in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, watching him, waiting for him to say something, to break the silence. "You didn't tell me you'd be here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Luke shrugged, taking a slow sip of his beer. "Didn't think it'd matter." "It doesn't," I replied quickly, too quickly. He smiled then, a slow, knowing smile that sent a jolt of heat through me. He stood up, the distance between us shrinking with each step. "Are you sure about that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart was beating so loudly in my chest that I was sure he could hear it, could feel the pull between us as strongly as I did. The air between us crackled with tension, the weight of everything unspoken hanging heavy around us. He was standing in front of me now, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the alcohol on his breath. Close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his body, and every rational thought I had left was screaming at me to walk away, to end this before it went too far. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped closer. "I shouldn't be here," I said, the words barely leaving my lips. Luke's gaze darkened, his voice low as he replied, "But you are." I don't know who moved first, whether it was him or me, but suddenly, we were so close that our bodies brushed against each other. His hand found my waist, his touch burning through the thin fabric of my shirt, and I felt myself leaning into him, my breath catching in my throat. This was the line. I knew it, felt it, the invisible boundary that separated right from wrong. I could still pull back, still walk away, and pretend that none of this had happened. But the longer I stood there, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the harder it became to resist. "I don't do this," I whispered, almost as if saying it out loud would make it true. "I don't cheat." His hand slid up my back, gentle, deliberate. "Then don't think about it." I should have pushed him away. I should have thought of my husband, of my kids, of the life I had built. But in that moment, none of it seemed real. None of it seemed to matter. All that mattered was the fire burning in my chest, the way my skin tingled where his hands touched me, the way my body responded to him in a way I hadn't felt in years. And then his lips were on mine. It wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. It was hungry, desperate, the kind of kiss that consumes everything in its path. I kissed him back with the same intensity, my hands gripping the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, letting myself drown in the feeling of him. It was reckless, dangerous, and it made my head spin with the sheer rush of it. His hands roamed over my body, possessive, insistent, and I let him. I let him push me against the wall, let him trace the curve of my hips, let him undo the buttons of my shirt without stopping him. Every thought of consequence, every rational voice in my head, was silenced by the need coursing through my veins. I knew I was crossing a line I couldn't come back from. I knew this wasn't just a momentary lapse, not just a mistake I could pretend didn't happen. This was something more, something that would change everything, and as much as I wanted to pull back, I couldn't. The door to my sister's room was just a few steps away, and I let him lead me toward it. We didn't talk. There were no words, no second thoughts. Only the sound of our breathing, the rustle of clothes being discarded, the weight of his body pressing against mine. In that moment, nothing else existed. Not my husband, not my children, not the life I had built. It was just me and Luke, tangled together in a mess of limbs and heat and need. And when it was over, when the room was still and the adrenaline faded, reality crashed down around me with a force I wasn't prepared for. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, my body still humming from the intensity of it all, but my mind spinning. What had I just done? How had I let it go this far? Luke rolled over beside me, his arm draped casually across my waist, as if this was normal, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The weight of what I had done settled in my chest like a heavy stone, and I felt the overwhelming wave of guilt wash over me. I had crossed the line. I had betrayed my husband, my marriage, everything I had promised to be. And there was no going back now. Luke's breathing was steady beside me, but all I could hear was the silence, the deafening, crushing silence of what I had just done. And for the first time in years, I didn't know who I was anymore. The drive home felt like a blur. I don't even remember leaving my sister's house, barely recall saying goodbye to her, mumbling some excuse about feeling tired. Luke didn't say a word as I slipped out of the bedroom, his eyes following me with a look that was both calm and satisfied. As if this were routine for him, as if none of what had just happened had any weight. But for me, the weight was crushing. Every mile that brought me closer to home felt like an unbearable tightening in my chest. The further I drove, the clearer my thoughts became, and with that clarity came the overwhelming guilt. It crawled up my spine, making my hands tremble on the steering wheel, making it hard to breathe. I had crossed the line I swore I'd never cross. I pulled into the driveway, turning off the car but not getting out. The house was dark, my husband and the kids already asleep inside. I sat there for a long time, staring at the familiar shape of our home, the quiet safety it had always represented. The place I'd built my life. But it didn't feel safe anymore. I didn't feel like I belonged in it. Not after what I'd done. I stayed in the car until the cold started to seep into my bones, and only then did I force myself to move. I grabbed my bag, quietly unlocking the door, slipping inside like an intruder in my own home. Everything was still. The house was silent, peaceful, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I tiptoed through the dark, pausing at the doorway to my children's room. I peeked inside, seeing them both curled up in their beds, the soft rise and fall of their small chests as they slept. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, and I had to bite down on my lip to keep from sobbing right there. What had I done? I finally made it to our bedroom, where my husband was already asleep. His side of the bed was rumpled, his breathing deep and steady. I stood there, staring down at him, the man who had trusted me so completely, the man I had just betrayed in the worst way possible. A lump formed in my throat as I watched him sleep, so unaware of how everything had just changed. I slipped into bed as quietly as I could, careful not to wake him, but the moment my head hit the pillow, the tears started. Silent, shaking sobs that I couldn't control. I turned onto my side, away from him, my body curling in on itself, trying to stifle the sound of my own guilt. I had ruined everything. The next morning was no different from any other, and that somehow made it worse. I woke up before dawn, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep, my head pounding from the emotional hangover of the night before. My husband was already up, getting the kids ready for school. Everything was normal. He kissed me on the cheek when I came downstairs, handed me a cup of coffee, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. I couldn't look him in the eye. As the days passed, I tried to pretend. I threw myself into the routine, work, taking care of the kids, making dinner, all the things that made up the fabric of my life. But every moment felt like a lie. Every smile I gave him felt like a betrayal, every laugh with the kids felt hollow. I was there, but I wasn't. Part of me was still back in that bedroom, wrapped in sheets that weren't my own, with a man I shouldn't have been with. I thought I could push it down, bury it deep, but it lingered. Luke lingered. He didn't text, didn't call, didn't try to follow up on what had happened, and that silence was worse than anything. It made it feel real. Like it wasn't some fleeting mistake I could sweep under the rug, but something deliberate. Something I couldn't undo. Weeks passed like this, each one heavier than the last. I felt like I was moving through life in slow motion, watching from the outside as my marriage slowly unraveled without my husband even knowing why. He still hadn't noticed, not really. He was busy with work, with the kids, with his own world. We'd always had our separate lives in some ways, but now that distance felt insurmountable. The guilt ate away at me, hollowing me out from the inside. I started to avoid him more, finding excuses to be out late, to spend extra time at work. Every moment in his presence was a reminder of what I had done, a reminder of the woman I had become. A woman I didn't even recognize anymore. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, my husband suggested we watch a movie together. Something light, something to wind down after a long day. It was normal, a small gesture of togetherness. But as I sat beside him on the couch, I could feel the space between us, the invisible wall I had built since that night. He was halfway through the movie when he paused it, turning to me with a frown. "Are you okay?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. For a second, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The concern in his voice was genuine, his eyes searching mine for something, some answer to why I'd been so distant lately. "I'm fine," I said, my voice sounding small, tight. But he didn't believe me. "You've been different. Distant. Is something going on?" Panic flared inside me, hot and suffocating. This was it. The moment of truth. I could either come clean, confess everything, or keep lying. Keep pretending that nothing had changed when, in reality, everything had. I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, I felt the tears welling up, threatening to spill over. I blinked them back, swallowing hard. "No," I whispered. "I'm just tired. Work's been stressful." He nodded slowly, not pushing it further, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He didn't believe me. And why should he? I was lying straight to his face, lying to the man I had promised to love and honor, lying to the father of my children. The rest of the night passed in a blur, the weight of the unspoken truth sitting heavy between us. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep pretending, keep lying, keep living with this constant guilt gnawing at me from the inside. But the alternative, the idea of telling him, of watching his face crumple in pain, of destroying everything we had built, felt unbearable. One morning, I woke up early, unable to sleep anymore. I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the coffee cup in my hands. The kids were still asleep, the house quiet, the kind of stillness that usually brought peace but now only brought dread. I had to tell him. I didn't know how, didn't know what I was going to say or how I would even begin to explain what I had done. But I knew that I couldn't carry this alone any longer. It was tearing me apart, and if I didn't do something soon, it was going to tear us apart, too. When he came downstairs, bleary-eyed and stretching, I could barely look at him. My heart pounded in my chest, my stomach twisted in knots. He kissed the top of my head, like he always did, and reached for his coffee. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice so quiet it barely came out. He paused, turning to look at me, his brow furrowed in concern. "What's going on?" I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every possible scenario flashed through my mind, his anger, his pain, the way his face would fall when he realized what I had done. I wanted to run, wanted to take it all back, to pretend this conversation never had to happen. But there was no running from this. No more hiding. So I told him. Everything. At first, he didn't say anything. Just stood there, staring at me like he couldn't quite process what I was saying. Like the words didn't make sense. And then, slowly, the realization sank in. His face changed. The hurt, the betrayal, it all flashed across his eyes in a way that broke something inside me. He looked at me like I was a stranger, like he didn't know who I was anymore. "How could you?" he asked, his voice raw, broken. "How could you?" I didn't have an answer. There were no excuses, no explanations that would make this right. I had done the unforgivable, and now I had to live with the consequences. The silence between us was unbearable. I watched as the man I had loved for so many years crumbled in front of me, his trust shattered, his world turned upside down. "I thought we were. I thought you were happy," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I was, too," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. He didn't say anything after that. Just turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the kitchen, my heart breaking into a million pieces. And in that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The life I had built, the marriage I had once cherished, it was all gone, crumbled to dust in the wake of my betrayal. Now, all that was left was the silence, the wreckage of everything I had destroyed.